hopefully this is a seminar that I do in 1 hour, so it's going to be consolidated to really 35 minutes. That's what we've got. It's like highly participatory. This is probably going to be, well, probably still heavily, and what that means is you do a lot of work in this seminar as opposed to just me, synthesizing information. So let me just start by saying a lot of what happened in apologetics. So I've probably been in the field of apologetics for around 15 years now, and I remember I've lost count of the number of times when I left a conference or left an event, whether me or a colleague had been speaking, and the response is, "Wow, that's amazing! I wish I could do that. That's amazing material." And I don't think I could ever actually say something like that in a conversation if I were put in that spot. This seminar is hopefully provides something of an antidote to that, so that you leave this conference, hopefully this seminar, but definitely at the end of this conference, feeling, hey, you have some tools now. Not like, oh, that's amazing, so inspiring, but almost a disconnect from the material to actually what you can do when you actually enter a new conversation, whether it be at the coffee bar, or water cooler, or even at a Thanksgiving meal, when things get a bit spicy, and not actually at the culinary level, but actually at the verbal, conversational level. How do you navigate that? So hopefully this gives you some confidence. Here's the thing, what I found in my time fielding questions as an apologist is that so many times people will say, look, we need answers. We need answers for the question I have. We need new answers. And what I've realized is actually what we don't need is new answers. What we need is fresh confidence. Because in a big way, especially in the West, certainly in America, but I would say generally in my travel across the globe, in the Western Hemisphere, we've lost the mojo. We really have lost confidence in that this is actually good news. This actually is very good news. So hopefully this seminar gives you some of that. I don't have a hard copy handout here. I do have a handout for the seminar. So if you do want the handout, I can easily send it to you. It would just be you going to my website. My website is nathanbetts.com. And go scroll way down to the contact page, send me, and just request, hey, can you have the handout for your seminar? And I'll just send it to you. A really simple plug and play. But I just don't have it here. But if you do want the handout, send an email via my website, and I'll get that to you, nathanbetts.com. So let me just start with this. I want you to think about a question that you, in your heart of hearts, if you're really honest, you don't want to be asked. Okay, so think about that person who's outside the faith, maybe a skeptic, maybe a friend of yours who's not a Christian. What is the question that you, if you were to be really honest, you would never want to be asked? As in, you would rather the rapture happen than have to answer the question. What is that question? Now, remember, we're not thinking in-house. So if you have questions of, say, like predestination, or we're not talking about that. We're talking about like skeptical questions towards the faith. Yeah, go.
Where's your evidence?
Okay, so evidence. Where's your evidence? Okay, keep going. That's the big one. Evidence. Okay, the Bible is true, but how do you know outside? Okay.
I don't know if that's extreme as you described.
Sure, we're taking in everything. It has to be a real question, not a hypothetical.
Okay, so there's just certain religious groups that challenge the Trinity.
Yep.
And that can be challenging.
Okay, Trinity. Okay, can you riff on that? What exactly about the Trinity is being challenged?
Just that Jesus, God the Father, and the Holy Spirit are all one. It's easier for people to believe they're separate.
Okay, so what, they're a contradiction, or they're separate gods?
Yeah, that they're separate.
Okay.
They're not all the same.
Okay. Okay, so Trinity confusion. Separate gods. Okay, keep going. Yes.
What would lead to that is that many will consider Jesus not to be God, or that
Okay.
Or that he was only became God later on.
Okay, so Jesus not God, and there are different variations of that. One is what you said. He became God later, but he wasn't always God. Okay, let's keep going. Take one or two. You have sort of
Bibles
divine inspiration or God's inspiration.
Say again.
The Bible's inspired by God. The question around that.
Say that in a question. Well, how does it come as a question?
Somebody might say, the Bible is written by men, not inspired by God.
Okay, yeah. The Bible's written by man, so not really inspired by God then.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that marker. You need to replace that. Yes. Okay, that's a great one, yeah. Contradiction in the Bible. Explain that. Okay. Take one more. Why do you believe? Okay. I'm running out of space here. So what I want to do here is I want to give you a framework. I want to give you a conversation framework as to how you can navigate conversation of faith. So here's the thing, and this is not a framework. This is a framework that has come to me over time, working with other colleagues in the field of Christian apologetics. When we have a question, this is where we start. When you're asked a question, you start there. So you're asking yourself, what is the question? That's the first stop. So we've looked at a few, we could keep going.
Did you go upstairs?
There are many. But first we have to ask you, what is the question being asked?
I'm going to run up there. Okay. Cool, thank you.
But we start with ground zero is, okay, what is the question being asked? Now, we look at these questions here, we say, okay, where's your evidence? Okay, hold on, is the Bible really true, given that, what's your outside evidence? You can't just, in the argument there, how do you prove the Bible? Are you only going to prove the validity and trustworthiness of the Bible by using the Bible? No, you have to have outside, you have to, the word would be extra biblical substantiation for that. Where is it? That's one argument. Another one is Trinity, and what you mentioned, hey, there's a lot of confusion around here. And the inference is, we can't believe it. There's too much confusion, so it's bogus. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So why does Jesus? Hold on. Yep. Okay. Great. Okay. And so hold on. Why does Jesus pray to himself? This is very. This doesn't make sense. Jesus is not. And then coming there, your inference was, well, this is also saying that Jesus is not God. Then we go back to the Bible. Since it was written by man, therefore it's not inspired by God. Also, by the way, there are many contradictions in the Bible. And also, then, why do you believe? The fundamental, that's the metaphysical question. Why do you believe is bottom line. Okay, so when you're asked a question, we need to first of all just start with that. What is the question being asked? But I want to say that actually, normally in conversation of faith, that is where, what do we do when we're asked a question? We answer the question. Right? I mean, that's just sort of almost like conversation 101. If someone asks you a question, you answer the question. What I want to say is, before we do that, we want to slow it down. In sports, they often say the great athletes, when you get into those pressurized moments, the great athletes are the ones who are able to slow everything down. So when we're in these conversation of faith, where things feel like they're speeding up and the temperature is rising in the room, we want to slow everything down. I want to suggest to you, we slow it down by first of all asking ourselves, who is asking this question? Who is asking this question? So before answering, I want to say, okay, who might be asking this question? Now, in some cases, this might be moot. Like if you're at, say, a Thanksgiving meal or just having a meal with a friend, you already know this person. But if you're saying having a question with a colleague who you know, but you don't know necessarily the nuance or the contours of meaning behind the question, you need to ask yourself, who is asking this question? So let me ask you this. Who might be asking this question? Where's your evidence? Just like take a shot at it. Who might be? An atheist? Okay, who else?
It's my brother.
Yep, your brother. Who else? A skeptic? What do you say? The old dude down the road, yeah. Who else might be asking this question? Where's your evidence? A lawyer. Yeah, now you're getting very nuanced, right?
Yeah.
Not just a friend. No, lawyer. And actually, with a lawyer, there's particular structure in mind. Now, okay, this is what that person is asking. Now we can keep going because there are many people who could be asking the question, "Where's your evidence?" But what I want to suggest to you is who, depending upon who is asking the question, is going to determine the meaning behind that question. Because questions come with clothes, and depending upon what is behind those clothes, that's going to tell us the meaning of these questions. But if we just go on the surface of the question, we might actually get it wrong. Because if I answer that question, "Where's your evidence?" to the lawyer, and then I also give the same answer to an atheist, I might actually be giving, let me put it like this. They might be, by the way, the atheist and the lawyer might be actually using the same language in asking the question. But do you see, the meaning behind both questions is different. Do you see? They're coming from different perspectives. So I could say actually what I say to the lawyer, and I could say the same thing to the atheist, but the problem is, for one or the other, I might be offering the wrong answer. Why? Because I'm answering the wrong question. And here's the thing, the right answer to the wrong question is always wrong. The right answer to the wrong question is always wrong. Does that make sense? So, we need to figure out who is asking the question. Once we get who, then we'll know, okay, so let me ask you this. Say if a lawyer is asking this question, "Where's your evidence?" we get to the next stage. The question behind the question. The question behind the question, once we find out who is asking the question, again, like I said earlier, this might be moot. If you know, if you're talking to your sister or your spouse, you know when they ask a question, for instance, if a spouse, if you're married or whatever, like something like that, close relationship, and they say, "Hey, did you do the dishwashing this morning?" In some cases, you're thinking, you're asking that, but you're not really asking, "Did you clean the dishwasher this morning?" Are you with me? Now, why do you know that? Because you know that person. Is this making sense?
Yeah.
But you only know the question behind the question. So, for instance, when my wife says, if I've forgotten to empty the dishwasher in the morning, "Hey, did you empty the dishwasher this morning?" I know that the question behind the question is not, "Did you empty the dishwasher this morning?" It's maybe, what is she asking?
Will you?
Did you listen?
Will you? What's that?
Did you listen to me?
Yes, correct. So it's a question behind the question, right? Like, so you have the question, which is not incongruent with the question behind the question, but it's not the same. There's deeper meaning. So we have to figure out, okay, now when we know who's asking the question, that's going to help us understand, oh, there's deeper meaning. There's a question behind this question. So let me give you an example. Jesus, I mentioned last night. Jesus talking to the Pharisees and Herodians. They say, "Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar?" It's a trap. It's a trap. They're there to set him up. But there's a question behind the question, right? For them, the question is, are you on the side of Rome? Or are you with us? Now, Herodians is like, are you with us? And the same question for the Pharisees. The only thing the Pharisees is, you better be with us, because if you're not, we're against you. So there's a question behind that question. It's not just a financial question. Now, how do we get beyond this? Because often what happens in this, if we know the question, the tendency there is to answer the question. And then actually, even if we scroll down, if we go to who, then we know, okay, now I know, okay, they're asking where's your evidence, but since I know, okay, this person is a lawyer, or this person is an atheist, now I have some of the nuance, now I have some of the meaning behind it, now I have the question behind the question. The tendency then is to give an answer. Because we have enough now. We can give an answer. And I want to say, again, we want to slow that down. And here at this stage, I want to suggest to you, we want to ask a question. We want to ask a question. Instead of giving an answer there, we want to ask a question. Now, why do we want to ask a question? Questions do many things. I'm running out of post-it notes here, so let me just say a couple things. One post-it notes, the function of post-it notes. We can talk about that later. But questions, what is the function of questions? At the very least, baseline, what do questions do? They make people think. And in so many conversations of faith, since questions come to us at least two levels, the intellectual and also the emotional level, it's very easy for things to ramp up and for all of a sudden the temperature to rise if we're just going statement for statement. But questions have the ability of slowing things down and helping us think. Have you ever been in a conversation when you or the other party has said, "I'm so sorry, I wasn't thinking"? Has that ever happened to you? If that has never happened to you, there's only one solution. You need to get married. Does that happen? That happens a lot. Because why is that happening? Why is that person saying that? Why might I be saying that in a conversation? We are saying that because we actually stopped thinking. We actually stopped thinking. The emotions ran so high that actually we stopped thinking. Questions help us to think. Questions also expose motives. That happened in Jesus when the rich young ruler comes to him. He says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" What does Jesus say? "Why do you call me good?" And what is Jesus doing there? He's exposing motives. So questions make people think. Questions expose motives. Questions also expose contradictions. We see that we don't have enough time because we're really running down the clock here. Questions also open up a person to their own worldview. Again, there's that idea of making someone think. Let me just share a quick story and then we'll land it. Years ago, when I was living in Toronto, Canada, I remember having a series of conversations with leading journalists there. He was a big public personality at the time. And I remember in his television studio at the time. He was an atheist. He was very public about his atheism. He had grown up in a Christian home, but he was very public and almost a bit warmly, in the most Canadian sense of the word, warmly antagonistic against Christianity. And I remember we had different conversations around the resurrection, around faith. And I remember one time I said, "Look, what would it take for you to believe?" And he said, "Look, Nathan, I'm an analytical kind of guy. I'm an analytical kind of guy. And in order for me to believe, I need proof. And the thing is, you can't prove any of this stuff." So the apologist that I took the bait. And I went on probably, just as he and I did, for like 20 minutes, outlining different ways, different evidence for the resurrection, evidence from Jesus, and et cetera, writing down these different arguments. After which I said, "Look, does that take you any further? Does that even move the needle at all?" And he said, "Look, the proof thing is one thing." But he said, "Look, Nathan, in order for me to believe, I have to change the way I live. The women I hang around with, the partying, the language I use, and I don't want to do that." And you see what's happening there? That was profoundly intellectually honest. But how did we come to that? We didn't come to that because I outlined the whole thing of proof, which, by the way, is not a bad thing. But I was able to actually find out what he really believed by asking him a question. I asked him, what would it take? And he said, "Oh, the proof thing." But actually, when I showed him that, and then I came back full circle and said, "Does that do anything? Would that push you any further?" And he said, "No." But how do we get to that answer? By asking a question. So here's a question for you. If you were to ask that lawyer, "Where's your evidence?" what's a good question to ask that person? Okay, what kind of evidence? Yeah? Why do you want the evidence? Yeah? Would that convince you? Yeah. Now here's the thing. The questions, I'm telling you, are worth thinking about. Let me just pause for a moment. We often think of Jesus as someone who actually just had the answers. But the more you think about Jesus' daily schedule, I've got to think he spent time thinking about how he's going to navigate conversations. So for us, we ought to spend some time, if we're talking to someone, or if we're anticipating a certain conversation, I want to suggest to you the gold is not just in the answers. The gold is thinking through what questions do we ask. Remembering that this is not just an intellectual discipline. This is fundamentally a spiritual discipline. So it's with Jesus' help, we're asking him, God, help me to think of a question that would be helpful, that could push this conversation towards you, that could inspire people towards you. Think of the people in your life, in our world, who are great at what they do. Think of people who we depend on, doctors. The doctors who are really good, or the doctors who are good at asking questions. Now you think of a doctor who actually does not ask questions. You go in and you have pain. You say, I've got this pain. I was sharing this over lunch with the students. You go into the doctor's room and you say, and the doctor says, where's your pain? I said, well, I have this pain in my arm. And instead of doing anything else, the doctor says, oh, I know what the problem is. And you think, no, you don't. I haven't told you anything. I just told you I have pain. But you juxtapose that to another doctor who says, okay, you have that pain. What happened? How did that happen? When did that pain start? What kind of pain is it? Is it a throbbing pain? Is it a dull pain? Is it a sharp pain? Remind me, when did this happen? And what's the duration of it? And you see all these questions actually helping, not only the doctor, but also helping you figure out, oh, this could be more serious or less serious. The good doctor is the one who actually asks good questions. You think of counselors. If you've met with a counselor, the magic and the gold behind a good counselor is not actually what they're telling you, but actually sometimes question the pinpointedness of their questions, able to actually help you think through something. So the questions are where the gold is. And by the way, Jesus did this all the time. So much to the point, I remember someone saying that as a skeptic, if you were to read just the New Testament, you could be easily forgiven for seeing Jesus as a politician. Because he's always answering a question with a question. But he's helping people think. He's helping people think through the issues. So first of all, we need to understand, what is the question being asked? Then, who? And if we get that, and by the way, if we get that one wrong, who wrong, we get the whole thing wrong. We need to know now who really is asking the question, because that's going to determine the meaning. That's going to determine the question, what the question behind the question is. Then we ask the question. Then what I put there is answer. What I put there is I just put 3 words. In order to formulate an answer, I say study, shape, and share. So much of that is actually, now the thing is, that might not be needed if you know the answer to the question. But if you're in a conversation in which you do not know the answer to the question, what I found is helpful is that first of all, we need to study. Actually spend time thinking, okay, what could be really helpful? So maybe it might be meaning, reading a book by Lisa Childers or other thought leaders on this topic, reading the scriptures, consulting a pastor, leader, then thinking of how to shape this response. So part of being a great witness of Christ is not just being, say, a C.S. Lewis robot or a Lisa Childers robot, but actually being able to formulate it in your own conversational way. That's the art of moving from learning what to think to learning how to think. And then sharing. So that's a seminar that I normally do in an hour in 35 minutes. 30 minutes, I think, with time for questions, if you wanted to ask any questions. But I'm really just giving a really consolidated piece here, because actually in this seminar I often have you tackle these questions and apply this framework. Yeah, go for it.
So if you were doing this with someone who you don't really online,
yes, okay, online.
If you need to answer the first question, what would you do?
If I can't answer, if I don't know the who part.
Yeah, if this person is just essentially all he said is honestly, I don't like Christianity, here's my question. How would you approach your response?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's happened many times, not in the online space, but just even for me, in travel, I've had countless conversations when they say Uber drivers, or a passenger on an airplane. I think questions are still the goal. So if I don't know the person, especially in the online space, it's so impersonal, not lending itself to actually meaningful discourse, I would still ask questions. Okay, so if we run that out, if you don't know the person in an online chat space, and they say, hey, I've got this question about Christianity, X question, I would still say, tell me a bit more about that. Where do you come in? And it's a bit of the Greg Kokel stuff too, but some of it is just really reflecting Jesus. Actually thinking, how can I be relationally intelligent here? Okay, tell me where you're coming from. What have you read? If they're saying, well, I read this in a book, okay, what did you read exactly? What inspired that question? So I would really start with the questions, because the thing is, if we get the question wrong, we get the whole thing wrong. So they might be asking, where's your evidence, for instance, in an online space where it's impersonal, we don't know who they are. You might not be able to find who they are, but you might be able to find what is informing that question. And if you can find that out, you can still, I think, make the question somewhat meaningful in the online space, even though they don't know the person. Yes?
In this type of framework, are you looking at like a unit? Like, so you answer the question, or you want to, is it part of something longer, like you asked before, that am I anywhere close?
Yeah.
Are you looking at that, or like, particularly a couple minutes, so you just gotta...
Yeah, no, both. It's a both and. Ideally, longer. Like I remember speaking to the Christian staff group at Microsoft years ago, and someone said, "Man, I got this question. This person always gives me this question. Like he stops the conversation by putting this embarrassing question about Christianity to me. What do I do?" In that case, I'm giving him, say, not just framework. I would give him some content too. But then the idea there is, here's a guy he's going to see Monday and Friday. So you have that. Sometimes it's not, especially say what I've done for most of my professional working life. A lot of what I've done, unfortunately, has been at a vocational level, one-offs. Which is very unfortunate now. But I will say, I still apply some of this to my neighbors, to the people I see on a regular basis that would not associate me with my work as much as just a person down the street, or at church, or at a sports club. So I would say it works both ways. This, I think, is meaningful, both, but this can be incredibly helpful if actually it's not a one-off. It's actually done in the mess of life where someone knows you. You actually know someone deeply and they know you deeply. But I think it's both. And as I said earlier, some of it might be moot, especially if you know the person. You have the question, but also you already know them. So that's going to help you know, what the question you have the question is. So you might just skip down to what's a really good question I ask here. And as I said earlier, that's the goal. That is the secret sauce of this. Not necessarily the answer. You think of actually, for some of us in this room, it was the questions that we had, or the questions we were asked that led us to Christ. So, yeah, great question. Yes?
Nathan, I've had multiple conversations with folks, and it typically ends in, let's just agree to disagree.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's the correct way to end a conversation, but as Christians, that's something that's for me. If you found yourself in those situations, what do you do if you get that response? What's your next step after that?
Yeah, so the question was, what do we do if we're in a conversation in which someone just says, hey, let's agree to disagree? So much of it is context, but I do think actually what Elisa was saying earlier, in truth, speaking the truth, combining the truth with love. A friend of mine who's a social critic named Oz Guinness, he says, look, if your truth ever outstrips your love, you have a problem. Likewise, if your love ever outstrips your truth, you've also got a problem. So I think in that case, we actually just need to be honest with what we need to be honest to our conviction in saying that, okay, if you think agree and disagree is where you want to land, we can do that. I actually would like to continue this because I think if we're actually having convictions that actually go against each other, then it's not a both thing. But if that's a synonym, if that's their way of saying, I don't want to talk anymore, then then it's probably best to say, okay. Sometimes, and that's why I think actually there isn't necessarily a one-stop shop answer for this, primarily because it's not an intellectual discipline, right? I mean, apologetics is fundamentally a spiritual discipline in which, in that situation, I'm asking Jesus for help. Okay, Jesus, this is my conviction, but what do you want me to do right now? And that, I will tell you, takes the edge off, because the power of our witness is not dependent upon our intellectual prowess. It's the work of Jesus through us. So I think that's what I would say. I would say there might be conversations in which we think, okay, Jesus, I think, what should I do here? And we might have a peace about just let that go. We might, but sometimes, and in other cases, we might have that discomfort of the Spirit of Jesus saying, no, I want you to actually just gently push and say, no, actually, this is what I think. There's not a one-stop shop way, but I think with the help of the Spirit of Jesus living inside us and us asking Him for help, I think we can actually find guidance. That could be really meaningful there. Yeah, that's a really good question.